Hi, everyone. Pastor Galen, lead pastor at Shine Hills Church. Thank you so much for joining us on this podcast. We hope that these podcasts will be a real encouragement to you on your spiritual journey. You can also connect with Shine Hills at shinehills.org. Hope you enjoy the program.
Across the street and around the world, Shine Hills.
Well, hello again, everybody, and welcome to the podcast. And we've just kind of continued to roll on here, Nathan. And I want to go back just a little bit. I want to talk about the Wit and Wisdom podcast that we had with Jim Fraley. You were on vacation, but you were on the phone. I appreciate you just taking time.
Yeah.
You had some really insightful things, and I want to talk a little bit about your question, because that question you asked, I think, has become real central in my mind as far as this social emotional learning.
Right.
That is really something I've really learned in this process. Of course, I was in studio and Renee Minder, and so I just thought it went real well. So I'm just going to give you some feedback that I've received.
Good,
some of it I've told you, some of it maybe I haven't, but I just random things. I think overall, I don't care what side of the argument someone might fall on. I think everyone has felt like it was a very fair and open discussion, which is something I think we both wanted. We wanted to say, here's what we've seen, here's what we found, here's some concerns, here's some commonality we found, and you asked some really good questions. I'd like to get into some of those, but I think in general, everybody that I've talked to, even some people that didn't necessarily agree with my particular view, let's say, on some of the books and whatnot, said that it was very informative. So
good.
I think that's what we wanted. We wanted people to be informed.
Yeah.
And then, okay, you guys decide.
Right.
That was at least as a pastor, that was my goal.
Yeah.
You know, and I talked a little bit about whether I should run in this lane or not. And I've had some people say that maybe I shouldn't be in this lane, and others say that you absolutely should be in this lane. So there's, I'm not going to try to make my decision based on feedback, but it's interesting feedback as when you run in the lane that I would say in general the pastors or churches don't necessarily get into, and that was
not in our modern society.
Well, no, that's a good point.
Yeah,
that's a good point, because it used to be pastors were very involved with everything.
Everybody recognized them, and I've proven this before, and we've talked about it on this show,
that's
and
a really
I've
good point.
spoken across the country on this subject. But the role of the pastor in civil society was people recognized them as the foremost moral expert, even in the realm of civil government.
Yeah.
And so it's only in the last 80 years in America or so that people have begun to try to separate those things out.
Yeah.
But a lot of the issues that are being dealt with, especially today, are foremost moral issues.
Yep.
And so we have to, obviously that is something that we spend our lives trying to study out and engage in and understand the philosophy and the theology and everything else involved. And so I appreciate your doing that.
Well, and I think, honestly, I don't know for sure, but I think based on the temperature that I've kind of gotten from people, that in this discussion, I feel like we were able to say, here's why we're concerned because of this moral issue.
Right.
These are issues that we think are dark themes, too early, too young, those kind of things. And to me, those are concerns that the church, and I'm glad you brought that up, I think the church should speak to. It's like, because this is the innocence of our kids, and we're trying to preserve, and here's our view. Maybe not what the world views, maybe differently. I get it. And it's especially, the government and school, they always say, listen, we've got to answer to all these different views. And that's true. I get that.
Right.
But they also need to hear our view.
Exactly.
And I hope it came across well. We'll say that.
I agree. Well, part of the challenge that we're facing is sometimes you'll find a curriculum. A number of years ago, it was Common Core.
Yeah.
Then later on, we have Wit and Wisdom, which actually comes out of the same background, by the way, as that other. It talks about social emotional learning. Now, one of the issues, and this is the reason why I asked the question back then, is I think everybody recognizes that children, when they come to school, they need to have certain social emotional things met. We go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Right.
And the first thing that he points out is a physiological need. Every person, it is difficult to think when
hungry.
you are starving.
Yeah, for sure.
And so almost anyone can recognize, well, yeah, it would be a much better thing if we expect a child to learn how to read. We need to actually make sure that they're fed.
Right.
And so we recognize some of those things. But Maslow actually goes up secondly then to safety. There's a reasonable expectation of safety. Of late, there have been people that try to define safety in different ways. There's a classic understanding of safety, you know. Some people, though, will try to redefine that to mean, well, actually, then there should be, you should let boys into girls' bathrooms and different things. They'll try to define that.
Wow.
And so you get into that. Then there's Maslow goes on to love and belonging, and then esteem. And then lastly, he uses this term, which is a Christian would start to worry about, and it's called self-actualization. And so when you look at social emotional learning, we all recognize that there are social and emotional needs.
Mm-hmm.
It's the question of, there's a different approach in how you get to where you fulfill those needs. And so when we talk about feeding children and making sure that they have a safe environment, that's very important.
For sure.
But there also is a political agenda that can be inserted at that point. So when we talk about wit and wisdom or Common Core, or it could be 15 other curricula that come up in the future, they can be very different. They can go by different names. They all normally have a pretty good name to them.
Mm-hmm.
But we still have to ask the underlying question, what are they teaching? And so I appreciate how you brought up some of these things are dark. Some of these things are very concerning.
Mm-hmm.
Some of these things, and I know that we're primarily speaking to adults, when they start talking about things like masturbation and other things in the curricula itself to young adolescents, we as parents need to say that is not right.
Yeah.
That is wrong. And while I do want to make sure that my child is fed and they're in a place of safety, you're now invading a jurisdiction that is not your domain.
Yeah.
That is the role of the family.
Well, exactly. And then, so this is one of those things kind of you learn when you jump into the deep end of the pool.
Mm-hmm.
There's things that you learn. And that book that you just mentioned, it says something about Dante in it, but it talks about some junior high boys and that a lot of these sensual type of topics come out. I was like, man, yeah, this is, I didn't even bring that one up. I wasn't fully aware and knowing exactly what it was, but that has come to my mind lately or come to my attention lately. It's like, you're absolutely right. That's, we got to speak to those things. Right. It's like, okay, guys, we've got to have some kind of place to push back. Okay, let's go back to social emotional learning, because it's Maslow's. This to me went from, I didn't know how, I don't think I realized how big of a deal this is in the teacher instructional realm. It's a big part of what they are aware of. And certainly, no question, I think everybody would agree, and if a child's hungry, it's going to be really hard to learn. Mm-hmm. And I think you could add some other things on there, some other social things. But one of the things that was said during that conversation about it, and this is where I'd like to follow up with Jim. At the time, I had a question, but I didn't really have the thing following up would get us off topic. It's really easy to get off topic on these kind of discussions. But he said we have to meet all those emotional needs, and it's like, wow, when you say all, what would that include?
Right.
That's a big umbrella.
Exactly.
And if, maybe it's race, maybe it's, you talk about safety, what does that mean? What are some of these all inclusive kinds of words, and that we have to meet first? Okay, hold that thought, because the other thing I think I've learned in this process of being able to meet with Jim Fraley and then Eric Jackson earlier, and then Jim when he came here, and then Roseanne Rennie, who's the head of the school board. Mm-hmm. These are, and then also Dr. Crispo, when we as pastors met with her and she told her story. So I'm kind of combining a lot of my observations. Okay. Right. But everybody has a story of maybe they've adopted a child or one of their children who has had, or even themselves. I think there were some that were even saying the stories of themselves, that these books that we might consider dark, that have suicide ideation, I would consider that dark. Yeah. Maybe have some other, I don't know, just some of the dark themes that are in these age books, they're saying this is how they're seeing it. And this is my learning point, is that they see that as this book is validating a feeling that either they have or their child has had, and it makes them, it validates them. So they see it as a positive, where I may see it as a way too early, way too young. They're seeing it as a positive. So it's just, it's coming at it two different directions.
Right.
So here's my takeaway from that. So, because I saw this, I don't think I really, until it soaked in, I thought, okay, they're seeing this as they're using these stories of their children, of the bad situations that have happened to them and their bad situations. But these books actually help this student. Here's my conclusion, is that darkness can come alongside darkness and relate to it. But darkness can't expel darkness.
Well said.
Only light can do that.
Yes.
So here's what happened. On the very day that you were on the phone, and we met with Jim Fraley and in here in the studio. That evening, there was a family that called and said, "Hey, would you come talk to our child? They're really concerned, really afraid of death and dying. Does it hurt?" And it's just consuming this 10-year-old child. And I said, sure. And so, that evening I went over, and it happened to be on the same day. Just the irony of this, it wasn't planned. It was just like this, they called and well, anyway, and I talked to this child and I listened to him, and he was reading a Wit and Wisdom book. I think it was something about two moons, and there's a lot of pretty graphic death, some point blank shooting, and some people being drugged.
How old was he?
He's 10.
10.
I think it was a 5th grade book. I think I'm right about that. So he was really fearing death, and he was, mom kind of had to pull it out of him because he was kind of shy to talk to me. And we kind of connected a little bit. Well, anyway, so I shared with him verses, and I said, I talked about some times that I had been afraid, and perfect love cast out all fear. And God did not give us a spirit of timidity, but a spirit of power and a love and of sound mind. And we're supposed to be strong and courageous. I use the verse that we end with. And I said, God has given us these tools to overcome those things. Right. When I can tell you, I don't know if it's still continuing to buoy his soul, but I guarantee you by the time when I left, and it was nothing that I said except just the scripture that I was reading, that light, he was lighter. You could see it in his countenance. You could see it, and I left, and gave him a hug or high five, and when I left or whatever, and he just seemed like he was in a better place. And it wasn't, the darkness, he had been reading this darkness, but all he needed is some light.
That's good.
And that is what the rest of the story can't happen, or doesn't, I say can't, but particularly in a school setting. I mean, they're not going to read scripture in our schools. Right. They're not going to bring that kind of light that Christ is bigger and stronger and more powerful than this darkness or this evil or whatever it is that is talked about. So these students who say that they relate to this darkness, it makes them feel good about maybe their pain that not feel good. But here's some story that relates to my pain and gives them some social emotional connection, maybe. But it can't dispel that darkness. And I think we're leaving our kids in that darkness. And so anyway, those are some of my takeaways from this whole process.
I'm so thankful that happened the same day.
Oh, man.
Because really,
I wouldn't have probably figured it out. It's like, oh my gosh, this is stark.
It juxtaposes two issues there. And so let's just step back for a second. When we talk about social emotional learning, and those who are trying to turn the school into a giant therapy session. Okay. What we see is there's a difference between the classical goal of education that you can see all the way back to Aristotle under his olive trees, teaching kids. What we see is this development through, and we've talked about the name Dewey, John Dewey, and his whole child methodology. And what he begins to do is, rather than teach the classics that most people understand, math, English, science, social studies, or before that, the 3 R's, reading, writing, arithmetic, and all that stuff, what it became was a whole kind of approach. Now, mind you, this was a man who was a co-signer of the Humanist Manifesto. His goal for the child was radically different than most people expect from public education. So when we get into the realm of the whole child kind of therapeutic education today and the social emotional learning, there are grave concerns that the Christian ought to have. And there are good teachers that are sometimes stuck with a document that they're supposed to teach to the child, and they recognize that's concerning. I don't know exactly what's wrong, but something's off here. And I think that we're finding that more and more in the education system in Cheyenne, because this is something that's sweeping across the country. But Cheyenne is certainly now part of this this system.
Yeah. So, I think as a person, maybe a Christian parent listening, I still think, bringing these issues up, we've got to do it in a way that is effective. Okay, so let's just say, for example, here's playing out some scenarios. Here's an ineffective way, in my opinion, is to jump in. Let's take the social emotional learning, and I've got one thing in my mind. You may have something in your mind. Somebody else has something in their mind. What social, and what was mentioned here by Jim Fraley was an empty belly or a sick belly. Someone that doesn't feel good. Right. And it's like, okay, so we got to meet those social, those needs.
Agreed.
He put that under social emotional learning. I don't know if I would have put it under there, but I understand. It's like, oh, it's fine if that's there. But my point is, if any parent or grandparent comes in and jumps in the middle of this and says, well, I don't want critical race theory or whatever like that, and this social emotional learning may or may not include that. But if that's what they're thinking, the teachers over here are saying, yeah, but this kid's hungry. We've got to meet this. Right. Well, my point is, we have to be really careful you jump into these things, because I think we jump into so I think we need to be very specific. And so that's why I stuck really close to, I know we talked about race and this critical race and some of that stuff, but my main thing that got me to this table was the suicide ideation that I perceived, and that concerned me at that young age. And that was the one I tried to really stay on, because, as I said at the podcast, it's like if you've done one suicide funeral, it's more than, and I've had to do, I don't know, several, probably in the 20s since I've been here.
Oh, easy. I didn't know that. That's a heartbreak.
And young people too.
Right.
So those are so hard and heartbreaking, and a family and it's like, so anything that looks like or smells like suicide ideation, it's pretty sensitive to me.
Right. Yeah. As
would be somebody else that has had some horrible racial slurs thrown at them. They're going to be very sensitive to that, but we have to understand, everybody's got a story. We've got to be really measured when we bring our moral code, if you will, to these things, because it's like, we've got to be specific. And I think we need to be measured in the way that we do this and try to move the needle without bashing. It's like, listen, there's some good that's in here. Right. And you got to be really careful. There's some things that are concerns. So let's talk about those.
Right. I think what came out of that for me, and also out of what you just said, is we cannot treat as normative the outlier. Yes. Meaning that there are people that do wrestle with that might be young, but there are many other people that you'll be planting an idea in their head. And so when we do that, and this is one of the grave things with essentially the education industry that we're seeing. Not every teacher, by the way, is a part of the education industry. What I'm saying is the broad sea changes that we see sometimes in curricula will begin to take ideas. Some of them might even be based out of a genuine concern. But it is a grave consequence when they'll take something that is an outlier and then make it normative. Right. It's what years ago George W. Bush called the soft tyranny of the low expectation. And what it does is it makes over everyone a low standard. And it's real. I think we've watched a lot of that in education. And that's the reason why I really am an advocate for school choice. Oh, man. To open the doors, to open the opportunity to people to find the school that best fits the need of their child. And I think that that's very important. Part of what happens with the educational industry, which is sadly what's developed with the monopolistic practice of the current public school system, is you force people into these, and parents grow very concerned, and they don't know what to do because it feels like there's a whole edifice here and nobody listens to them talking anymore.
Yeah.
And so they get frustrated, but they don't know what to do because they don't see any change.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think school choice really ought to be something we push for.
Yeah, for sure. And well, I don't know if it's an outgrowth of that podcast, but it's an outgrowth of my awareness.
Yeah.
Because since then I've had people, have said, here's some things that are happening. I just want to throw, I think some of these you might know, some of you may not, but there's one woman that emailed me, and she said, I started to think that I was on the wrong side of this issue. After listening to the podcast, I realized it emboldened me to say, you know what? I see that, there is reasons to stand firm on some of these concerns that we have.
Yeah.
I thought it was
Wonderful.
It was a wonderful outcome. Not long after that, another person called. It's a teacher that told me, "Hey, I just want you to know, there's a movement going on about a charter school.
Oh, good.
Doing a new charter school.
That'll be 2.
They're taking. Is that right?
Yeah. We're seeing more and more of that.
Okay.
And that's very important.
But this one, I believe, is going to be actually brought before the school board on,
Okay.
and coming soon to a school
Right.
board near you. But I hope, I hope to understand a little bit more about that one.
Good.
But that's another option, if you will, a choice. And so I think there's some people that are saying, you know what, we probably will never come to a complete agreement on some of these things.
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible for us to have some options or some choices? And I think that would actually, I think that would be a good outcome from,
I agree.
from all these discussions.
It's a very American discussion too.
Exactly.
One of the things that
Exactly.
has made America such a powerhouse in its history is the fact that we've had competition, and it's a good thing.
No, that's true. Yeah, not everybody would see that as a good thing, but it definitely is. If there's a
Right.
a standard or a way, and then people can see, it's like, wow, this actually works, and this is, well, isn't that kind of what Daniel did? He said, you know what, I don't want the king's diet. I'll have my just
Right.
vegetables, right?
Right.
And you
Yeah.
test me.
That's good.
You test me in a week or two and tell me if I'm not as healthy as the rest of the guys.
Right.
And
That's
apparently well, he was. So
I like that.
just on vegetables, how can that possibly be?
food choice.
You can't be as near as healthy on the
I like it.
vegetable. But anyway, I don't know. Any other final thoughts that you have as a learning, learning or even the future of where this thing may be going?
Well, one thing I want to definitely say is having dialogue,
Yeah.
being able to sit across the table, and even if there is, as you phrased it, a time where you might respectfully disagree
Yeah.
or agree to disagree,
Yeah.
to be able to actually articulate clearly two different competing worldviews and perspectives,
Yeah.
but do it in a way that is kind and compassionate,
Yeah.
I think that that's a very good thing. And I think also one thing that it affirmed for me is that I really want to see genuine education freedom
Yeah.
to move out of the monopoly that currently exists. Wyoming, by the way, is one of the worst in the nation.
You've told me this. I
Yeah.
can't. It's hard to believe, but it's
You look at
it's true,
edchoice.com
yeah.
and what you'll see is 95.1% of our children are locked into the public education system. It's the dead last in the nation, at least as far as where there are statistics. There are several that don't provide statistics like that. But what we do need is we need options for our children. And I think COVID has helped raise awareness for that need in a way that we've never seen in this country.
Well, it's been an interesting dialogue. I feel like it's been an educational thing for me just to jump into this lane. And I just had just this little smattering of some of the, pastors that I know of old that would jump into this, running this lane. It's like, oh, this is there's just some interesting dynamics because, we lead churches and people don't vote with their hands around here. They vote with their feet. Right.
Yeah.
That's everybody has their free will to say, yeah, I'm not down with this. And so as a pastor has to think through those things too.
Right,
And before you step into this lane, it's not so much about what kind of blowback you might get, but it's like, am I going to represent Scripture, the church? Jesus says you got to speak truth in love.
Yeah.
And that is more difficult than people know. You can either speak love and light on the truth, or you have a whole bunch of truth with no love.
Yeah.
But you do those things perfectly. I think it's still one of the most amazing things when you see Jesus do it in a way that's convicting, and yet the powers that be walk away going, wow, that was profound. I don't have an answer for that one.
Yeah, that's good.
And he,
Yeah.
He still died on the cross. I should
Amen. Right.
It didn't necessarily get him favor with them, but at the same time, there were some that did. I think we know Nicodemus and some of the other Pharisees did say, no, this was this was the Son of God, and then a Roman soldier said, no, this is the Son of God. I've never seen anything like this. But speaking truth in love is the model. It's not easy.
That's right. It's not easy.
You're really way better at it than anybody that I know.
The more I engage in conversations, the more I learn what I need to. How little I know.
You do it well, and you model it well for all of us. And I appreciate your historical context that you bring and the insight that you brought. The social emotional learning. I think I've gone from a neophyte to at least a general, pretty good understanding of what it is and the importance of that. And of that knowledge, but I also think I've learned a little bit about some of the why some people hold on to some dark themes of the books that I understand it now. It's like, okay, I get it. I don't necessarily agree with your conclusion.
Right. Agreed.
And I don't agree that you can leave a child there.
Exactly.
They need light.
That's right.
We all need light.
Right.
But
and to not break into their innocence.
Yes. Yeah. So there's I think I understand the problem better.
That's good.
Don't know if we can hopefully get to some solutions. But in the meantime, I think we'll land this one. I think is fun to kind of regurgitate that a little bit. Yeah. But I think everybody, especially on this topic, we need to be vigilant. We need to speak truth and love. We need to be very prayerful, and we need to be strong and very courageous. God bless you all. Thanks.